ABC 17 News at 6:30 on KMIZ starts now.
And we want to welcome everyone to a special edition of ABC 17 News at 6:30 tonight. We're honoring a Columbia legend, a man credited with bringing together Columbia's black and white communities quietly and patiently during a time when other communities erupted in violence. We're talking about Elliott Battle.
In the next 30 minutes, we're going to take you back to Elliott and Muriel's arrival in Columbia, some of the fight they personally took on with desegregation, and the legacy they leave behind to the community and to their family. We're telling the story of an award-winning director and producer combo of a documentary titled Battle, Change from Within. Take a quick look.
Dr. Aslan, who was the superintendent of schools here at Columbia, had learned about what we were doing in Dalton, and he called and asked me if I had interest in coming to Columbia. This was 1956, to work at the Douglas segregated school. I made the trip over to Columbia and went down Providence Road where Douglas School was located. And I saw the housing situation here, and I saw the lifestyle of African Americans here, and I thanked Dr. Aslan, but I told him I thought that we were going to be moving to the state of California.
And we want to welcome Julie Middleton, an organizational development director and extension professional at the University of Missouri. Your focus is on workforce equity and civil rights. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And then Michael Hicks, you are part writer, part editor, part photographer, part director for this film. You've been with Mizzou for over 20 years in the film and television industry. We also want to thank you for joining us as well today.
Thank you very much for having us on.
I want to say this film has already won several awards. It's been out into the market, into the world for over a year. Why did you guys pick Elliott Battle? How did this come about? Why desegregation? Why Elliott Battle?
Well, actually, Juana Maria Cordanas Cook, who's one of our executive directors and producers, actually had the idea to come up with the film. She had been making other documentaries in Cuba, and she came to me one day and said, you know, I've been making documentaries in Cuba, but we have a quiet hero right in our own community. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could make a documentary about Elliott Battle? And I said, oh my gosh, what a great idea. Let's do it.
Dr. Middleton, you said a quiet hero. What a wonderful way to put this. I was not fortunate enough to meet Mr. Battle, but you knew him personally.
I did know him personally for many years, and actually when I was a student in 71, actually from 1967, I had met the family and knew of him, you know, at that time. But he, over the years, became such a dear friend to me and to my husband and to the whole family. So he was just amazing to us.
And Michael, you get pulled into this project, I'm assuming. How did they hunt you down?
Being part of Extension, Julie naturally turned to my office to produce this video and put it together. And I did not, unlike Julie, have the honor of knowing Elliott before the process begun. And it was very interesting. I could take a perspective of an outsider looking in, and I can honestly say every bit of Elliott's public persona is actually who that man was.
You guys, when you're putting this documentary together, you started off kind of introducing people and reminding them about desegregation, Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas. You introduced kind of the story that is leading up to why he is a quiet hero for Columbia. Kind of talk to me about the Little Rock Nine, the footage you found, the information that you got. Why the importance of putting that into the film to kind of kick off the story?
One of the goals in making this film is we wanted it to also have sort of an educational value and purpose beyond just telling this story about Elliott. And we realized whenever we were talking to a bunch of middle schoolers that a lot of times they didn't understand the impact of the struggle the nation went through at that time. And so we wanted to make sure and put Elliott's accomplishment in the correct frame of reference.
Well, you know, when I was a child, there were always talks in school about which side of the tracks you live on. And I think in many cities across the nation, you still hear that kind of talk. But in Columbia, during the time of Mr. Battle's early arrival, there was something else called red lines, right?
Redlining, absolutely. The real estate agents would only show African Americans property in certain areas, and they would never leave the African American community to let them have the opportunity to live outside that area.
We actually have a couple of sound bites, kind of how Little Rock kind of leads into the transition for Columbia. We're going to let everybody take a listen.
Until October 25th, 1 month after federal troops first escorted the Little Rock Nine to school, the black teenagers still had to ride in military vehicles. After that, they still faced a barrage of verbal abuse, harsh treatment, and confrontations. Desegregation caused much turbulence across America, with riots, protests, and Klan violence. Yet Columbia, Missouri, made a quieter transition.
And of course, the credit is going to Elliott Battle for helping with that transition. Kind of talk to us. Desegregation had already kind of started in Columbia by the time that Elliott Battle actually got here. I think they desegregated schools in 1954.
Absolutely.
He didn't arrive till what, 56?
56.
What was it like before he got here, and why do you think there was such a need for him to be here?
Well, it was certainly segregated communities. I mean, the town was segregated, the schools were segregated, everything was segregated. And so he walked into a situation where everybody was living kind of a separate life. And he just decided, my goodness, just look at this. Something needs to be done in this community. And step by step, it wasn't anything that he did very quickly, but just step by step, he made that difference within schools, certainly, and then within the community. And then housing was another thing. He just decided, I don't want to have to live within some parameters. I want to have the opportunity to live somewhere else. And so he and his wife decided, let's go look somewhere else. And let's not even think about this redlining. And let's see if we can find a place that we want to live in.
And he took heat from everyone on that, from the white communities and the black communities, didn't he?
He absolutely did, because the African American community was thinking, what are you doing? Why can't you live with us and be comfortable here? And then the white community was like, oh my, they're coming into our community. So he was really in the middle. It was a very difficult spot for him to be in.
It's always interesting to listen to the stories that people have, and you guys actually found so many people in Columbia to be able to tell their stories of when they grew up back in the 50s and the 60s or even earlier than that. We have another soundbite for people to be able to listen to about those stories.
Great.
See, in Columbia, all the black people lived in basically probably a 14-block radius.
There was a practice called redlining, where they would block out certain areas of town, and that was the only place that black people could live or could buy property.
And then, of course, they were talking about Douglas School, which is where Elliott and Muriel both actually started, which we were talking about how amazing it was that they actually changed school policy.
Just for them.
Just for those two.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they were a very powerful couple. And, you really can't talk about Elliott Battle without talking about Muriel Battle, because they worked as a team. And they were a very powerful couple in terms of they were able to live in both communities. And they could talk to the community, the African American community, and then they can work within the systems and the power that be to make a difference and to make a change.
And just really quick, so many powerful pictures that you have and pieces of video. Where did you get all of your footage and pictures? And
we spent a lot of time going through the Missouri Historical Society. We got a lot of help from both the Missourian and the Trib, allowing us access to their archives, and a lot of the background information stuff. I was luckily enough, I came across Roger Gafke's dissertation, and he did a history of the school systems in Columbia. And so I was able to pull from there, and the school board opened up their archives. They literally let me go sit, and at the time the archives were still in this small closet, and I had a little work table and a scanner there, and we went through and we just double checked and verified all the facts and make sure that we were telling the correct story. I mean, it was very interesting how early on the school board adopted a desegregation policy, and that was very progressive of Columbia. But then also there's the history of the people. There was a lot of pride at Douglas about Douglas School because it had been their school, and you know, it was part of their community. And even though Columbia was progressive, at the same time there was a lot of history and a lot of elements that held people back from having a lot of desegregation.
Okay.
Incredible. And we're going to have more to talk about with Michael and Julie in just a moment, but we're going to take a quick break.
He was a person who could bring individuals or groups together to common ground, which may not have been possible were it not for his unique style.
On the other hand, Elliot kept himself completely in the background, always supportive of somebody else, always supportive of the process, always supportive of the community, always supportive of the school district. And someone like that you just feel great about.
Father always insisted that we understand that we were no better than anyone, and that your education, where you lived, none of that made any difference. That every single person on this earth we were equal to.
My father is so humble that we didn't even know half of the achievements. And a few years ago, he was going back to his alma mater, Tuskegee Institute. That was the first time we found out he had been president of his senior class. And so I don't know how to answer a question about the most significant achievement, because those were the things that were the most unimportant to my father.
Welcome back to the special edition of ABC 17 News at 6:30. We are talking with Michael Hicks and Julie Middleton, two of the producers and directors of a documentary titled Battle, Change from Within.
It's a documentary about Elliot Battle and his power to help Columbia transition from a segregated community to a desegregated community. And we're talking late 50s. He moved here in 1956. He started working for the Columbia School District. He and Muriel did. Yes. Kind of talk about, you guys really kind of focus on how he was in the school, how he was with students, how he was with parents in the movie. Kind of talk about, you know, how Battle and his family really just stood out from the rest.
He was such a caring person, and he really believed in the students, and he cared about each and every student. And he always would try and find out, you know, what they needed and that kind of thing. And so I think that really is shown in the film. The strong caring that he had for everyone.
And you think that caring, well, it's evident if you know the family at all, but how that rubbed off on the children?
Oh, yeah. All of the children are very caring. I mean, and they certainly were very accomplished. And I think one of the things he worried that the children would be impacted by the fact that they had to be those tender little soldiers and get into some very uncomfortable situations. But each of those children have been very accomplished in their own rights, every single one of them. And so I don't think it has hurt them in any way. But it was certainly a difficult time for all of them. But they all learned to care about others. They learned about how important it is to try and make a difference in your community. So this is also a story about leadership. It's a story about community engagement and what is it that one person can do to make a difference in a community. And he taught his children that too. You can make a difference, each of you, by your own deeds and actions.
And I always feel that this story is more than just a story about desegregation. Really, Elliot sort of had a philosophy, the way that he would live his life, how he judged his accomplishments. His self-judgment of accomplishments weren't based on what committee he was appointed to, what he participated in. He really based that on what he accomplished. I think that's such a valuable lesson that we could take away, if we could just incorporate that type of thinking in our everyday lives, we would accomplish so much more and we'd be so much more satisfied.
You know, his family, he started them out early. You mentioned that they were soldiers. We actually have a clip from your documentary. It's so good. I'm not giving this away, I promise. You need to watch the whole thing, which will tell you when and where you can. But we have a clip of how he had to make the choice to take his kids out of Douglas School and put them into a white elementary school.
Yes.
When they were, what, kindergarten, first grade?
I believe they were first grade.
First and second?
Yes.
First and second grade?
Yes.
They started young. Take a look.
And our children that first year went to, one was kindergarten, one was first grade, went to Douglas, where Muriel and I both were working. But then of all the people in the town, not even the superintendent or anybody at the board office, it was the man who I would have least expected. He was the principal at Ridgeway School, who was an older Southern man who called me up one day and he says, "Elliot, I'd like to talk with you." And we went over, Muriel and I, and talked with him, and he says, "I don't know whether you realize that you're in the Grant School District, but no black student has yet gone to Grant. If you want to send your children to Grant, it's only a matter of just going to the board and transferring them to the Grant School." Well, we went over, and that second year, they went to Grant as the first African-American students to go into the Grant Elementary School.
Now, you just saw the one daughter shortly after that who was talking about how, from that point on, I think her mother said they were told to join. If a black student wasn't part of a club or an athletic group or something, yes, they were supposed to join it.
They were expected to join. They were expected to join. And so they joined the swim team. They joined all of the activities, the social clubs, and then I guess the school yearbook society, and just one thing after the other. And it was really funny because I think it was Donna who said that she didn't even like to swim, but her mom said, "Hey, there isn't anyone who's African American on that swim team, and so you need to join that." And so she didn't really, she tells a story about how she didn't really want to swim, but she did. And so each of the children took it seriously, and they raised the mantle, and they went right out and they joined all of those activities.
Leaders,
it was amazing.
Leaders, of course, tell us to do something that makes you feel uncomfortable, and yes, that's exactly what it seems that Elliot did for his own children, and now their children don't have to drive their own children quite as hard, right?
That's right. Today we don't have to do that so much. But this was a time when there was certainly a need for that kind of thing. And if he was going to make a difference, he knew that the whole family had to buy in, and the whole family had to be involved. And so they all were involved. And I think it was difficult. And think about that for a parent, how hard that would be to put your children in those kinds of situations. But they knew this was really important, not only to their family, but to the entire community. And they said, you know what? We have to do this.
You were mentioning while we took our break that you, A, didn't have any troubles finding anybody willing to talk about Elliot Battle, but B, when they did talk about it, they had so much to say about him.
Whenever we first started the project, we hadn't refined down. I mean, we're looking at three main areas, which was the Battle's move to Columbia, and Elliot being the first black faculty member at Hickman. And then we're also looking at their children being the first children to move into Grant Elementary School. And then we looked at the desegregation when they broke the redlining and actually found a house outside of the traditional zone that black people lived at that time, which was as late as 1963. If you can, get your head around that, that's pretty late, it seems like. One of the interesting side things that I found very curious is I did a lot of background research on Joe Barnes, and I almost didn't leave the clip in there where he calls Joe an older Southern gentleman, because I thought the more I found out about Joe Barnes, he was actually leading free meals for children very early on, because he was going, my kids are hungry in school. They can't think and study unless we feed them. And he was very progressive in how he was a principal and what he did, which totally makes sense why he talked to Elliot and Muriel about living in the Grant District. And luckily, whenever I was talking with Roger Gafke, I said, you know, Elliot calls him sort of a traditional Southern gentleman. And I said, did you get a chance to interview
Mr.
Joe Barnes at that time? And Roger kind of laughed and said, well, actually, he was my principal when I went to elementary school. And even though Joe was very progressive and a progressive thinker, he was, Roger said, yeah, he could give people that impression. He would come off that way. Very proper, very structured and organized.
You mentioned in 1963 them taking the risk of moving outside the red line. They actually went to people who were personally, you know, selling their homes and asked them, and they found a couple that was willing to sell the house. But it wasn't easy, even though some neighbors were happy to have them there, others were not, and things happened.
People who even liked them saying, I'd love to, but I can't do that to my neighbor. Wow.
Elliot actually approached people selling their houses that he had helped their children in school. They liked the battles, they knew the battles, but they would still refuse to sell the house to them.
So we actually have a story to share of one incident when they did buy the house.
Yes.
Of a very sad incident that did happen. Take a listen.
And I was walking the dog without a leash. He ran across the same man's home. The man came out with a rifle, shot him in front of me.
It pained. It pained when he had a dog to be shot by a neighbor.
That was really difficult. It was really hard. As we were interviewing Elliot, you could just see the emotion welling up in him, and you wondered if there was really going to be anger. But I think what happened is there was a lot of pain and a lot of sadness during that clip. And then at the end, you could see there was resolve. I just need to toughen up.
To hear that story from your son, from your child, a little boy coming in and saying the neighbor shot the dog, these days you would think that that would turn into a terrible news story of revenge. And not only did Elliot Sr. take this internally, he taught his son how to deal with his own anger and frustration through this.
Yes, he always used those stories for some of those positive lessons for the children. You know, let's think about what you can do to make things better and how you need to respond to make things better. And so he always used those things just to make another point and to help develop his children. I mean, he was a school counselor and an educator, and so he used those opportunities.
I love the entire movie, but one of the favorite bites is when he talks about how change has to come from within. And we have a clip of that.
I think fighting from within is the right way to go. I think that the only way you're going to make change is to be a change agent.
I'm assuming it's that kind of, because he actually has a daughter who referenced. This must be his mantra, if you will, because his daughter even knows the within. You guys, is this what inspired the name, the title, Battle Change from Within?
Yes, absolutely. And we actually put the entire film together before we had a title, and then we watched it, and then we thought, oh my gosh, Battle Change from Within. And so really, yes, it very much has to do with his philosophy of making change within systems and with using the processes and the systems that are in place to make a difference. And also, there are kind of like two different ways of looking at change from within. The other change from within is looking at yourself. Be the change that you want to see. How can I make a difference myself?
Elliot would talk a lot about when his family did these things, they did them not only because they felt they were the right things to do and that working within the structure and the organization, they could have the most impact, but also it was very important to them that they wanted to be the example of how to peacefully accomplish things, how to make a significant difference. And so they held themselves up to that type of standard.
It's a fantastic movie. Michael and Julie, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Really quick though, before we leave, just out of curiosity, their legacy, what kind of legacy do you think they're leaving in Columbia?
It's a tremendous legacy, and you can already see that. I mean, we have Battle High School, certainly, and I think that speaks to the importance of the difference that this family has made in the community. And if you go to talk to anyone along the street or anywhere that you are, they'll talk about the Battles and Elliott Battles, surely, and certainly Muriel as well, and the difference that they've made here.
And great stories.
Just really quickly, this DVD is for sale. You can check out the website. It's battledoc.missouri.edu. And if you stay tuned, the movie is coming up over on MyZoo in just a few minutes.